Creating your own reality. Is it possible for me? I am Jennifer K. Hill, the Consciousness Architect, and I am here to tell you that it's not only possible, it's closer than you might think. Welcome to the show. Welcome back, friends, for another episode of Regarding Consciousness. We have a very exciting episode today to share with you on a life worth dying for. And we have brand and personal expert around this, Laura Beauparlant. I have to drop the T at the end, as she so elegantly pointed out earlier. Laura is the founder of Lab Creative and the author of Brand Chemistry, as well as the creator of Brand Camp, and is an award-winning international speaker. She is an entrepreneur for the last 20 plus years and helps ambitious founders create their impact-driven legacy brand. She leverages her creativity and experience to inspire and empower everyone she meets, allowing them to reach new levels of impact, influence, and success. In her role as the founder and creative director of Lab Creative, she has created high-caliber strategy and art direction for hundreds of clients internationally. As a speaker, Laura has been recognized for the chemistry she creates with her audience as she teaches and inspires. She candidly shares insights into her own story of overcoming adversity and finding clarity in both life and business. That is exactly what we're going to be talking about today, is the consciousness behind creating a life worth dying for and a business worth dying for. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. So excited to be here with you.
Yes, it's such a pleasure. We are both part of a similar mastermind group and we hit it off. And I said, oh gosh, when she told me about this idea of a life worth dying for, one of my favorite songs, a guilty pleasure I have, is a Tim McGraw song about live like you are dying. And it's one of my favorite songs that when it comes on, it causes you to pause and to ask yourself, what is a life worth dying for? What would life be like if we knew we only had a few days, weeks, or months to live? So, Laura, tell us how you came up with this concept of a life worth dying for.
Yeah, and I think it is so true. I feel like we're taught most of our lives, you've probably heard that saying, you can't live every day like it's your last. That's a bad thing if you did. And it's you've got to be responsible and I understand some of the meaning behind why people have said that, but it does get ingrained in you and it makes you think that you've got forever when in reality you don't. And then life ends up passing you by. And so for me, how I came to this language a number of years ago, I went through my own existential crisis. And I would say that what happened to me during COVID was reminiscent of recovering from a car accident many years ago. I spent about 2 years recovering from that when I was a teenager. And suddenly I'm back in this state of lockdown, not being able to do the same things, that my life being stifled by this experience. And I know we were collectively having that experience. And I felt like I'd been there before. And I started to see these patterns. And I felt like I was optimistic because I knew that there would be silver linings and there's lots of takeaways we could get if we wanted them and if we were open to them, and not to minimize the things that people went through. However, what happened is so many people really stopped living. And it's really hard to get that momentum back when you've stopped and you just start existing. And even I felt like I was doing that. I was like, well, I'm just coasting now. And the days tick by. And I had this moment in this existential crisis, as I said, that I was going through, that I felt like, is what I'm doing worth dying for? If I'm trading today, a day of my life, a day that I'm getting closer to the end for what I'm doing and who I'm spending my time with, is it worth trading that day for? And so that's where that really came to me. And in that process of really understanding, it was very layered and it took me months to work through this for myself, but really understanding that list of what are the things that I should desire out of my life, the shoulds. We've all got them. And then the things that I truly desire. And I remember making these two lists. And then looking at that list of desires and really assessing them and going, do I really desire this in my life or do I think I should?
Mhm.
So the list of shoulds got bigger. And so I narrowed that down and ultimately I came to 8 words that I live my life by. And every day I start my day writing in my journal, what am I dying for today? And it really keeps me intentional. I look at those words. I look at maybe what meetings I have. I knew I was going to be on your podcast. I knew who am I going to be interacting with, or how do I want to show up as a wife, as a mother, as a boss, as a human being, and be very intentional in which of those words I'm going to be living that day. And then at the end of the day, I journal on how I lived those words. And
Ooh.
it's kept me really focused on being intentional and knowing that every day is a day worth dying for.
Mm. I would love to know a little bit more, Laura. Can you talk to us about an example of how that shows up? Are your words always the same? Are they the same 8 words? Do your 8 words change day by day? How do you embody all the 8 words? My brain is going a million miles a minute, curiously wondering about all these things.
Yeah, I know I can't live each of those words every day, but it is consistently those words. Basically, when I came to those, I'm happy to share them. Everything I want and I do and how I want to show up lives inside of those words. So they're not goals, they're a way of being. They're how I want to show up, how I want to live, how I want to be remembered, the time I want to spend with people. So each day would be slightly varied. However, they're always based on those 8 words.
Beautiful. So, what are some of your 8 words if you would like to share?
Yeah. So they're adventure, love, fun, creativity, connection, impact, vitality, and wealth.
How long did it take you to come up with those words?
As I said, it was a process. And what I love is that I kept really great journals during that time. So I could actually go back and see the process that I went through. And it was very unintentional, but this is where I landed at the end of that. I would say it was probably over a month or two that I went through this inner journey to find those. And now I know not every day is going to be adventure, but and this, my family and I, we moved to Sicily in 2022 for 10 months. And so when that opportunity came up and we started talking about it was pretty immediately a hell yes, because it aligns with adventure, right? It was going to be adventure. It was going to have an impact, like so many of my words. It was going to be fun. It was going to be this and that. Was it easy? No. Was it amazing? 100%. Was it worth it? Absolutely. So it doesn't mean that everything is easy in my life, but it makes my decisions easy. Does this align with how I want to show up? And so adventure is going to be intermittent in my days, but vitality might be every day. Even a word like wealth, which I think a lot of people end up shying away from, it could be me actually paying bills, paying my team, because that is still, I'm building a business and I have the opportunity to pay other people, right? Where it feels great. So it's the money, or it could be sending a proposal. It's not always about the money directly coming in, but it's about what am I doing today that is building my wealth so that I can create more opportunities for myself, my family, and I can have a greater impact. So my wealth and impact are tied together. So all of these words flow together really beautifully.
And what happens, Laura, if you get stuck? What happens if you're in the middle? I remember a crazy trip. Like you, I love adventure. And years ago, I used to be chairperson of the American Wine Society. I was like 25. How that happened was crazy. And I remember there were 14 of us in northern Italy that were going on this trip that I had planned at 25. Whoever trusted me with that, God bless them. And, I remember, like, we had a crazy adventure, and at the same time, it felt like a huge obstacle because my friend Warren, who was driving the car, we were in this little Peugeot. My friend Jess is there and Warren's wife, and they're driving, and they're in the front, and we are lost. This was before the days of Google Maps. It was, like, back in the day where you used to have to print out that thing called MapQuest, And we're trying to find
Mhm.
this place. We're supposed to be staying in the hills, and we are pretty sure we're going to spend the night in the car because we are absolutely lost. It's getting dark. So we pull into this little cafe sort of thing, convenience store, the Italian equivalent of a convenience store. And
Yeah.
we go in and we gather chips because we're pretty sure we're going to camp out in the car that night. So we go and we get back in the Peugeot and the car won't start. And Warren's worried and we're like, oh God, now we've hit a whole new obstacle, right? We now not only don't know where the villa is, we have chips to live on and the car won't start. Turned out there's all these little Italian men sitting outside sipping their little espressos. And they look at us and they are laughing and laughing. And we're like, thanks for laughing at our like suffering over here. Turned out, Laura, we got in the wrong Peugeot. There were 2 identical Peugeots. We were in one of the little Italian men's Peugeots. Long story short, we did survive it. We didn't wind up having to stay in the car that night. We did get the right Peugeot. So tell me when those moments where maybe catastrophe seems to happen, right? You can't find where you're going. You're traveling with your kids and your family. How do you then bring those words and that energy back in when you're faced with confrontation? That seems like it would be the biggest struggle.
Absolutely, and it happens. There are days that get derailed, days that at the end I'm like, "Wow, I did not live these words in the way that I plan to or hope to," and I get to reset tomorrow. So, I don't beat myself up if I have a day where things go pear-shaped. And I think when those challenges arise, it's meeting them. And one thing that I'm really focused on is accepting the challenge and knowing that things aren't always going to work out the way that I want and have especially when you travel, those adventures, that is when things are probably more than likely to go wrong. And it's easy to get sucked into that. And it's happened to me. And it's also taking that deep breath and going, okay, I've got this. What do I need to do next? And just focusing on the next step. And I had an experience last year where I was going on a trip to Uganda. And I had a timeline where I had to arrive to join the group in order to continue on to the rest of the trip. And we're staying in Sicily. And I'm making my way to the airport. And I hear little rumblings in the bus that I'm on about the volcano, about Mount Etna, an active volcano. And I'm heading towards it basically because the airport is like in the shadow of the volcano. Who put an airport there? No idea. Anyway, I get to the airport. The airport it's open, but all flights are canceled. It is chaos. There is ash swirling around the floor of the airport. Not a lot of hard to find somebody to speak English. Flights canceled, and I had a 3-leg flight to get to Uganda. I was like, "Oh my god," and I had that moment where I was literally like, "This trip isn't happening," and I just got caught in that inner dialogue of giving up, and I gave myself a little bit of space to have a cry and feel like this is not going well, and then I put on my big girl pants and I reached out for help. So what I've learned too is that we can't do all these things alone. And you are going to have these experiences that don't turn out the way that you want them to. And we have people in our life that we can reach out to. And I reached out for help and I got the help and guidance I needed to get me out of that state that I was in and get my butt in gear. And long story short, I ended up getting an overnight train to Rome, an 11-hour train ride to Rome, moved my flights to the next day, and was able to join up with my group. I was in transit for almost 48 hours, trains, planes, like it was bonkers. And I was so grateful that when I got there, that I had the people around me to help me get through that experience and get me out of that state that I was in. I just needed to reach out. So I think it's that just knowing when to reach out for help, which
Mm.
is something we don't always do.
What I love about that too, Laura, is it ties into one of your 8 words, which is connection. And so if it's one of my dear friends, Jocelyn Herman Saccio, always teaches that the context is decisive. Like if I put up my finger, those of you listening might not be able to see it, but my index finger is pointing upwards. You could say, what is my finger? In the context of body part, it's a finger. In the context of number, it's the number one. In the context of direction, it's pointing up. And as Jocelyn always
Mm.
likes to remind me, the context is decisive. So, what I'm hearing you share in this, Laura, is that your context is adventure, your context is connection, your context is love. And out of the emergence of that, then all of a sudden everything else becomes possible, the vitality, the ability to travel 48 hours. Yet, if the context is fear, or if the context is blame or regret, then that is going to color the whole experience. Just like when I was with my friends in Italy, we still look back on that story and laugh in hysterics about the little old Italian men just cracking up as we got into one of their Peugeots. And but it makes when you can look at it both in the moment and in retrospect through the lens or the color of the context, which was adventure or whatever it might have been, then it gives us different access. And I think that's one of the dangers of consciousness is our retrospective of how we see things. It can be our greatest ally or our greatest adversary. If we look back through the lens of
Mhm.
victimhood and blame, or if we look back through the lens of adventure and gratitude, we have two totally different stories, yet the same story that emerged through different contexts.
Absolutely, and I can relate that even to the car accident that I was in. I was hit by a drunk driver, and it took time, but I forgave him,
Mm.
and that was really important. That was that I did it for me. It was part of my experience because I didn't wanna be in that victimhood. I didn't when I don't look back on that event in my life with anger and victimhood and anything, I look at it as, "Look at all the gifts it actually brought to my life." But because I forgave, because I went through the journey of all of that self-work that I needed to, deal with the anger and everything I was experiencing, helped me to process that so I can look back on that event very differently than I might have had I kept holding on to the anger and not forgiven. And I think these are things that happen in big events and small events throughout our life.
Yes, and I want to piggyback on what you had said earlier about the journaling. I think journaling is such a great way for us to reflect and then to have a record of our reflections and our mentality and to actually appreciate how far we've come. I was on a call
Mhm.
with a friend and mentor recently who was sharing with me one of his rituals, which is every birthday, he sits down in a private place and rereads all his journal entries from the prior year.
Wow.
Then he has this spreadsheet that he has where he looks at every week of his life during that prior year and he codes them green or red. And his goal is that could half of his weeks or more throughout the prior year have been green, he lived a life worth living that year. And I thought, what a
Wow.
beautiful context to encapsulate all the wisdom that you learn in the year. I don't know about you. I write journals every day. I have not gone back and read them for years.
I've had moments where I've gone back, but yeah, I don't always. I do at the end of the year always do a reflection. I do something called the year compass. I don't know if you've heard of that, where I reflect. It's called year compass. And basically you reflect on the previous year. And one of the things is write down every highlight achievement, something from the past year. So it forces you whether to go back in your calendar or your journal to mark all those moments. Like maybe it's the trips you had or this something that significant that happened in your life. And it's amazing to go back and look at all the things I did and accomplished because sometimes you feel like, oh, the year went by, it flew by. What did I do? What did I accomplish? Did I spend it the way I wanted? And to spend that time reflecting on the previous year, and there's a bunch of different questions that it asks, and what are you leaving behind? Then it's some planning for the next year. What are some of the things? How do you want to show up? Who are you going to spend time with, reach out to? So it's a great reflection on the past year and then thinking ahead to the next year.
Mm. So wonderful practice. I think that it's easy for us to get hard on ourselves. You and I are part of this group called Baby Bathwater. And it's funny, there's the part of it is where they think do this thing called baby fails, where these wonderful entrepreneurs like you and others will share stories of our epic failures. And I think it's important for us all to remember that no matter who you are, whether you're a best-selling author, entrepreneur, mother of five, whatever it is, we all have our failures. And yet, how can we look at those as springboards and jumping off points for what catalyzes us not only into who we are today, but into who we, at our heart's deepest desires, yearn to become? And I think that's
Yeah,
the adventure is that realizing that these epic failures that we have are part of our story and part of having a life worth dying for is knowing that you don't always want everything to be hunky dory. If everything's just easy peasy and rose colored glasses, then you don't appreciate the moments where you think you're not going to make it to your destination in Uganda or Italy or wherever,
yeah,
or whatever metaphor that means for you. It's the trips, the falls, the bruises, the scratches, the scrapes that make life worth dying for. So tell us a little bit more about that.
absolutely.
If somebody is really struggling with right now and they're just thinking to themselves, Jennifer, Laura, I can't. Life is too challenging. I have kids. I can't put food on the table. What Jennifer and Laura are talking about sounds nice in theory, but I don't have the privilege of being able to do that. What feedback, what message would you give to them?
Something that I heard years ago that I thought was really powerful is this too shall pass.
Mm,
And that's the good and the bad. The moments where you're on top of the world, you're doing all the amazing things, this too shall pass. Something will happen. It will derail you. It will take you down. And also will the challenges pass. So I think that's part of it. It's also knowing that there are chapters in our life, there are moments, there are different phases that we will go through, and whatever you're experiencing now can change. And I think it's also maybe you can't make big, broad changes in your life, but what is a small thing you could do today? Is it actually getting up 10 minutes earlier so you can journal? Is it thinking about what are the things that you really want in your life? Maybe you can't change the things that are already in your life, but could you add in a little more fun,
mm,
right? Could you add in a little more vitality? Get in that walk, get in those things that help you feel alive. Is it calling a friend? Is it what are those I think we like to think that it's the big travel and it's those are amazing for sure, but it's the everyday daily things. Is it the hugs that you give to your spouse or your partner or your kids? Is it we have a not a rule, but it's more of a joke now, but a 6-second hug rule because I learned that it takes at least 6 seconds for oxytocin to be released in the body from a hug. So my younger son never wanted to hug us when he was little. He was very independent. And so I'd be like, "Okay, let's 6-second hug," and he would count it down. He'd be like, 1, 2. But now he's the one who gives like the most amazing hugs because we created this 6-second rule. And it's amazing to see like the actual change in somebody's body when you just hug them for 6 seconds. It's a tiny thing. Well, find somebody to hug you for 6 seconds at least. That is a little thing. It's those little moments of joy or fun or connection that we can have each day. And honestly, most of them are free.
mm. So true. It's not like you have to go out. Some people might be listening and thinking, oh, I don't have money to go to Uganda or to wherever. That's a whole other episode we need to do. I used to teach classes at the Microsoft store to teach anybody from anywhere around the world how to travel around the world for less. Hashtag total side trick at Travel Zoo is one of my favorite travel tips. I'm always like giving it to Uber drivers and people. Though you can have an
Amazing.
adventure at home. Remember when we were little kids and we'd be living in a pirate ship and conquering islands in our own bedroom. And yet, I think we allow ourselves to get hampered by responsibilities, by our mind, really. And I think I had read an interesting thing once that said up till the age of 7, our right and left hemispheres are connected and regularly communicating with one another, which is why young children, 7 and younger, are able to have these imaginary tea parties like it's happening for real for them. And yet us as adults, we're like, "Pshaw, that's not real. You don't know what you're talking about." And yet, what if we could recapture? What if we could reinvigorate that playful, magical, whimsical, imaginative essence that we all have? In fact, I think might not remember the story exactly right. I had heard a famous author named Jane Houston. She's a famous thought leader, an American author, and I happened to be at a talk that she was giving once. And she referenced a time where she's 5 years old and Einstein comes to her class, and all the little kids are a titter, like they're so excited because here's one of the most prominent scientists in the world, right? And so this one little punky kid, they're like, "Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Einstein?" And this one little kid, his hand goes up and he's, "Mr. Einstein, I'd like to know, how can I be as smart as you?" And he looks at the kid and he says, "Use your imagination, young lad." And so the kid sits there and crosses his arms. And then he says, "How could I be smarter than you, Einstein?" And he says, "Use your imagination." And so he goes on. He basically says, "People pay me lots of money, but I'm not the one who creates the mathematical formulas. My only goal is to imagine riding around the world on a wave of light and then translating that into a way that other people can make it reality." And I always remember that metaphor of we don't always have to be the one who knows how to make something happen, but if we allow our imaginations, even if you can't ever leave, even if for some reason, God forbid, you're paralyzed and you can't leave where you're sitting and listening to this, you could still, to Einstein's point, imagine riding around on a beam of light or whatever it looks like, or being in the sands. And it's so true that we have this capacity to live a life worth dying for, even if we did it sitting in our own home today.
Absolutely, and I love that idea. I think we're often taught or we grow out of our imagination, or we're taught to get our heads out of the clouds or to stop dreaming or daydreaming, and the reality is that's what has made all the amazing things in the world is people's imaginations and their vision for that. And just to add to that, I heard a saying, I'm trying to remember who said it. It's that we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing.
Mm,
And I think that idea of fun, some people might say, "Oh, that's so it's trite," but
mm,
fun and joy and laughter and connection is so good for the soul, and it keeps us young. It keeps us energized and connected. For Christmas, we got our kids a foosball table used. So we got it for, I don't know, maybe a couple $100 at the most. We play foosball almost every day in our house now. We'll like my older son will put on ABBA or we'll listen to some music and we play foosball together. It might be for 10 minutes. We might have a battle for 3 best 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5, but we're playing. And we're like, it's not just for the kids. It's just as much for us. And I think we forget that somewhere along the way because we get wrapped up in all these responsibilities of life and adulting, and I've got them too. And how can we fill our life with more fun and joy and people who encourage us to do that and that we want to do that with?
mm. So beautiful, Laura. If people want to find out about how to work with you as a brand expert, how to learn more about your services, about the book you've written, where would they go to do so?
Sure, you can go to labcreative.ca and you can find us on social media. Lab Creative Inc. is our handle across all platforms. And you can look me up, Laura Beauparlant, on LinkedIn or Instagram. Happy to connect with anybody, any of these places.
Beautiful. Well, Laura has been here with us today, sharing a little bit about how we can live a life worth dying for. I invite us all, let's see what's one thing we can do today, one thing we can do this week or this month that makes our life a little bit more worth dying for, that allows us to play a little bit more with ourselves, the world, and our imaginations, and to go out there and to ride around on your own magic carpet of your mind, using your consciousness to catalyze you to the world and the life you dream of. I'm Jennifer Cahill, and it's a pleasure to be with you.